and we're going to get started. So welcome everyone to our conversation today about 5 areas teachers need to master right now. I think we all recognize that we are in very unusual times. And I run a school leaders mastermind, and that is the topic du jour. That's what everybody wants to find out. How can we make sure to open school safely, open it properly, be prepared for no matter what kind of environment and what kind of setup our back to school model will look like, whether that's remote, that's in person, some variation thereof, maybe some kind of blend. So I am here to do whatever I can to help, recognizing that in 1 hour we're going to be limited, but also understanding that I have something that I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit later that will give you the opportunity to go much deeper. And I'm excited to talk to you about that, and we will unpack it. So without further ado, let us get moving. Hello, Janet. Hi, Jill. Welcome in to our conversation. Janet, a returnee. So nice to have you back. And Jill, thank you for joining us for the first time. Okay, so here, for those of you who do not know me, I am a former teacher and school leader. I currently coach and consult for school leaders, teachers, and others. And I provide educators and school leaders with best practice instructional leadership tools and techniques to help move the academic needle in classrooms and schools and Zoom classrooms and virtual platforms all throughout the world. And I'm excited to be with you today and hoping, really hoping that even in the overview kind of macro level presentation that we are going to have today, you will get many ideas that will drive the conversation forward for you and make you more effective in your professional practice. There's a ton, by the way. I'm just curious to know how many of you are on a very tight timeline. In other words, you need to be off the call by 3 o'clock Eastern. And how many of you have a few extra minutes should I choose to go a little bit over if need be to make sure that I don't miss anything? So just curious there, you can put it in the chat. I'll be taking a look and to see if I'm working with, okay, well, I got a good response here, a few extra minutes. Yeah, that's probably what we're gonna do. A few extra minutes, maximum 15. I don't even think it's gonna take that much, but let's give it a shot. I haven't talked this fast in a while, so let's see if I can accelerate my speaking capacity once again. By the way, I think most of you are here already when it comes to the chat, but for those of you who are not, let's say Jill, for example, I see, and I don't know if anyone else at this point, please adjust your settings on the chat to all panelists and attendees. And this way you can, I'm just typing something into the chat here, a link that I would like for you to access. Okay, you probably don't need the www part of it. Impactful. This is for the second component, /toolkit. By the way, there are a ton of goodies here, but I would encourage you to go there if you need any certification. Oh, that's a mistake. I think it needs a second dash there. Hang on, I'm going to put it in. Second /. That should work, the second one. Okay, let's test it and see. Can somebody please just test it and confirm that it is working? That is where you can find a DIY certificate for your attendance today. All right, that is enough about the announcements. And I just want you to know, please do stick around until the end. Not only do I have goodies to share with you as far as teaching is concerned, best practices till the very last slide, but I also will be sharing with you a very special buy one, get one offer for webinar attendees. This is literally the only group that's going to be getting this special offer. So please stick with me to the end, because if you think that this webinar delivers value, you can only imagine how much more value will be delivered in the context of a deep dive bootcamp that I am planning with a colleague at Siegel, who has been on a couple of these webinars already. You can find her stuff on my YouTube page and on my website as well, which I'm going to link up a little bit later. But there's some really quality content. And I did not just choose Etty for the variation. I chose her because I know how great she is and how high demand she is as a coach. So please listen in for that later on, because I do think it is critical today to be as empowered and as informed as ever. Okay, so these are the 5 steps, and we can call these our objectives. I'm going to be hitting on all 5 of these, not nearly as deep as if I would be doing them one at a time. In fact, even some of these by themselves could be split into multiple components. Like for example, number 2, we could talk about engagement and differentiation and learning styles, each as their own webinar. And in fact, I did focus on each of these separately. So we're going to compress it and condense it, but it's going to give you a sense of what each of these are. Okay, some of these perhaps are a little bit more critical for you than others. Some of you might be more experts in some areas than others, but the main thing is to understand that if you hit on these 5 pieces, from my perspective and from others, principals, coaches, teachers that I've been speaking to, you are going to be maximally prepared for the uncertain, uncharted waters in which we're going to continue to be swimming through and engaging in for the foreseeable future. Number 1, to master delivery no matter what platform you are engaging in. Number 2, engaging, right? Creating engaging lessons that differentiate, that meet the needs of different students and their learning styles. Number 3, having an approach to assessment, right? If the children, students are on the other side of your computer, how do you make sure that they know what you're teaching and that they are accountable? Number 4, finding ways to develop student social emotional needs, right? This is a critical component because as I see it, as kids move out of school and into the workplace, these are the skills, probably more than anything we teach them from a technical standpoint, that they will need to be successful, certainly to hold on to their job for extended periods of time. And then finally, a plan for the first few weeks so that you can hit the ground running and enjoy sustained success all throughout the year, which includes relationships, classroom management, things like this. A lot of stuff that we will cover in a short period of time. So I hope that you are listening. I hope you got your notebook out. I hope that you're going to be able to, when I circle back and say, what did you learn today? What was most meaningful to you? You'll be able to reference it quickly because you'll have it top of mind. I am recording this. It will be available later for you to listen to, but the best learning will happen now if you are engaged. So if you've got anything else going on, your smartphone is nearby, other possible distractors, do whatever you possibly can to be fully present. The same thing you want from your students, provide for me so that you could have the very best learning experience for yourself. Okay, of course, if you have any questions or any comments, please do use the chat. I check it often, and I want to make sure that we are learning in a way that is fitting and appropriate for a group like this. Okay, so that is the focus of our conversation right now. Now, when it comes to number 1, again, we're talking about mastering the delivery of instruction, whether it's in-person, remote, or blended. All right, now, I'm not going to get into what all of them are in detail. I will tell you that that is the focus of at least the first part of our very first boot camp session, where Etty will go really deep specifically on these points. But face-to-face is what we're used to. Online is what we got used to. Blended is some variation between the two. And she'll also talk about the flipped classroom. And the more that you master different ways by which to deliver content, the easier and more effective, the easier it is for you to deliver it, and the more effective you will be in delivering it over the next weeks and months, and possibly longer. Who knows how long this will extend. Okay, and by the way, I think we all recognize in one form or another that even though there is, or hopefully will be, a day in the not too distant future when normalcy will return, I do believe there are elements of everything we do in life, how we shop, how we do business, how we travel, whatever. A lot of things are changing and probably will never fully revert back to the way that they were. And I think that that's very true for education as well. So there will be a demand for remote instruction. There will be a demand for a variety of different things that maybe 6 months ago we never would have really entered our mind as realistic or desirable. But now that people have gotten a taste, and now that we've been forced to change the way we do business, the likelihood is that this will have a lingering effect, and on top of it will likely be a preferred choice by many moving forward. So to me, whenever we think about doing something well, especially if it's in the service industry, as teaching is, we want to be asking ourselves, what is the user experience? UX stands for user experience. Okay, so what is it like to be on the receiving end? So for example, today, right, we're doing remote learning. What is it like to be on the receiving end? What am I doing well? And what am I not doing so well? You could actually put that in the chat if you'd like, right? What are the things that I'm doing well right now? And as we're engaging, obviously I haven't given you any work yet. I haven't formally taught you anything, but what is it that I'm doing well that you would say, that's something that makes me want to listen more? Conversely, is there something that I'm doing right now that makes you feel, I wish it was different. It would make me more interested, more engaged. You are welcome to respond. I'm a big boy and I can handle all forms of feedback, both positive and constructive, but that really is the thought process over here. Okay, that's what we want to be thinking of. What is it like to be a student? What is it like to be a student in a virtual classroom versus an in-person classroom? And how can we make all of them the best experience possible for our students? One of the reasons, by the way, that I like to give professional development training is because I find that it gives us a glimpse or a reminder of what it's like to be a student, to sit, at a table for extended periods of time, to have to talk with other people, to have to learn something. So it puts us back in the student's world for a period of time. Okay, I greeted you by name. Awesome. Okay, I laid out the objectives right away. You want to know what you're going to be learning. Okay, great. These are awesome, and I'm glad you picked up on that. Okay, there are probably things I'm doing that are not so great, and maybe you'll be interested in sharing that too. But the point is, you're starting to think about it from somebody else's perspective. And by the way, if you're not sure, right, I'm asking colleagues, so I'm getting feedback from you. You could ask your colleagues. You could have a coach or a colleague or maybe an administrator visit your classroom and say, I want it to be most effective, or maybe even surveying your students, so long as you can keep it professional. We don't want our students to be openly criticizing their teachers, thinking that they're sort of equals with us. On the other hand, giving them a platform by which to share feedback and asking, what can I do to make this learning experience better for you? Right? I can't see it from your side. I can only see it from my side. Help me help you. Right? If you present it like that, you're going to get some really good feedback. And I don't care, if your students are 16 or 6, they're going to give you, in their language, feedback that will help you. They will give you things that will, inform you and guide you and allow you, of course, to do your job even better. All right. So you'll study up on how virtual learning differs. We need different tools in order to do it. Right? It would be the equivalent of, yesterday, for example, my kids were all sitting around. They were bored. It's really hot where I live, which is northern New Jersey. We're in a heat wave right now, and we have a pool in the backyard, but it's nothing substantial. So they wanted to do something, and one of my kids came up with the idea of going canoeing/kayaking, and it's not terribly far from our house. And I went with my son in a canoe. 2 of my kids went in a kayak. It's a different experience. Right? Where you're positioned on the water and what kind of oar you need to use in order to paddle are just 2 examples. And so therefore, different experiences or different tools different vehicles require different tools. So I might be great in person with proximity, but I can't generate or replicate proximity, for example, when I'm virtual. So what do I need to be doing instead in order to creating some other bridge between myself and my student, even though we are physically not in the same space? I hope that this is making sense, and I certainly invite you to ask questions. I will stop from time to time to ask you to give feedback, but please don't wait for that. If there are questions or comments, now is the time, all the time is the time to ask it, and I'll get to it as quickly as I can so that we can keep the conversation going. Now, there's a lot online about virtual versus or remote versus in-person learning. Again, we're going to touch on a lot of things in just a short period of time. Here are some norms that you may want to use. You may have already been doing this with your students since March or thereabouts, whenever you started in a remote environment, right? How to dress, how to use mute or unmute, chat, raising your hand, backgrounds, clapping, all these things which seem basic and maybe even petty makes a difference, okay? Creating proximity, thank you. Is it, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is it Deirdre? And if it's not, I apologize. But either way, thank you for your point about proximity. That is helpful, sort of leaning in a little bit and letting people know that you are connecting, maybe asking them to bring the camera a drop closer from time to time. All of those things can matter or can make a difference. And here you just have some examples. But the main point is having norms that you can live with, and that is going to encourage your students to show up ready to learn with their learning mindset on. They shouldn't be in pajamas. They shouldn't be thinking, oh, I'm just jumping on class and I'm going to jump back to whatever I was doing before or after. Class should be the focus, and there should be certain rules by which you operate to ensure that things are happening smoothly. If you want to establish, if you want to add your norms to the chat, go right ahead and do that. Let's learn from you as well. Right? What are some of the norms that you use that are not listed here that helped you engage with your students and maintain etiquette or netiquette with your students so that they felt, I'm in a classroom, this is serious, I need to learn, and this is how I'm respectful of self, respectful of learning, respectful of teacher and of classmates. So go ahead and populate the chat with those norms. Would love to see what you have to say. And in the interim, I'm going to transition to the next slide so that we can keep the conversation and the learning moving forward. Okay, so we talked about mastery. Here are 4 different bucket areas. Some of these might be provided to you by your school already. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting into the details. Hopefully you know what these are. But every good, according to Jeff Utek, I think that's his name, every good remote or virtual learning environment takes advantage of 4 different types of tools. An LMS, which is a learning management system, a backbone, which is a place where information is stored like Google Drive or Dropbox, a tool for synchronous learning, which is learning live, what we might call, face-to-face in the moment, as well as asynchronous learning or teaching and learning, which is where I load something at point X and you access it at point Y. Knowing what those tools are, identifying them, and then mastering them, becoming proficient, really working hard at the beginning of even before the beginning, they're coming into the year, really confident. At this point, frankly, there are no excuses. We all had excuses in March. When this first started, we all had excuses, and we could say we weren't expecting this, no matter what we were told. Nobody thought it would be this pervasive and this impactful and whatever it is. But now that we've been in it for months and we have a summer, we cannot justify any lack of preparedness. We must come in feeling as ready as possible. And of course, talking with colleagues, making sure that we know the latest and greatest that will help our students. Having these 4 pieces in place and knowing how to use them is critical. Now, you may be familiar with this 4-level process relating to competence. I'm not going to read it all to you. Hopefully it's large enough for you to see. But our goal is to move through the boxes, starting in the top left, down, over, and then back up to the circled unconsciously competent, which means our goal with whatever we do personally and professionally should be that we're so good at it, excuse me, we don't really even think about it. Like driving a car. When you get into a car, you're really not thinking about all the aspects that you were thinking about when you first sat in the driver's seat years ago and you were learning with a driving teacher. You know how to ignite the car, you know how to position your mirrors and your seat and all this. You don't really even think about it, and you just start driving. And then you're able, as a result, to focus on what you want to listen to, who you're talking to. Maybe you're going to grab a bite next to you, that kind of thing. Obviously, we don't want to be distracted, but we don't have to worry about the minute-to-minute, moment-to-moment activities associated with driving because we are unconsciously competent. As teachers, we want to become unconsciously competent. So first, I need to know what I don't know, right? So creating that awareness. So for example, in the previous slide, is there something here I don't even know exists, or I don't know what it's called, or I don't know why I would need it? So that means that we are unconsciously incompetent. We don't even know about it. Then we move to a stage, a relatively quick stage by which we know we don't know, from which we move to a level where we are taking steps to become more competent. So we're conscious, but we're competent, but we're still conscious, which means to say we're getting good at it, but we really have to still think about it, right? I can start to ride my bike, but I still have to think about balancing and pedaling and where I position myself and all of these kinds of things. I know how to strum a guitar and make a proficient sound and song out of it, but I've got to really think carefully about all of things from finger position and whatnot. Whereas once I'm unconsciously competent, all that stuff jumps off of our radar completely. And that is the goal when it comes to anything that is new. And the only way to do it is by practicing a lot and asking for feedback. And as you get better, I actually just was listening to the book Peak, which is referenced actually by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Outliers. But Peak is the, let's see here if I could quickly access it. So it's Anders Ericsson is the primary researcher in the book, and he's famous for the 10,000 hour rule. But really, he talks about deliberate practice. If you practice with intention to get better, and you establish metrics by which you will be able to measure that you are improving, then your practice will predictably move the needle for you and help you become a better practitioner, a stronger practitioner, and a better professional. Okay? If there are any questions about anything I shared so far about remote learning and the need to use the right tools and become proficient at it, please ask now. Even if you want to ask later, that's fine too, but now would be the time by which we can do that. And while you're thinking about your questions, I just wanted to share this with you because this is research from the University of Oklahoma. I came across it like 15 years ago, and I just find it to be very useful because it shares with us what it is that teachers feel generates credibility. In other words, what students feel, excuse me. A teacher is considered credible by students when they are, number one, competent, number two, trustworthy, and number three, dynamic. Those are the three qualities, okay? Competent means they know their stuff. They're qualified teachers, right? They know how to deliver content. They have mastery of the content. They do what we consider to be good foundational instructional practices. Trustworthy is more about relationships. We'll talk about that more over time. They keep promises, they follow through, they give good feedback, they're clear, they treat people with respect, and they're dynamic, right? Which I hope you are sensing even in my conversation. They bring their energy to the classroom. They're interesting. They're looking to engage. They offer opportunity to ask questions. They're not always doing the same thing every single day, but they differentiate and they vary. All of those things contribute to quality instruction. Marcia, to your question, you will receive a PowerPoint. You won't receive the PowerPoint, you'll receive it as a video, yes. You'll get an email with the video emailed to you by tomorrow. Let's continue. All right, so are there any other questions? Are there any other questions relating to this? And I'm curious, is there anything in here as I sort of scroll back quickly to remind you what we focused on? I'm just going to scroll backwards and forwards for a moment. Is there anything in particular that you thought was a meaningful piece of information, whether it's the actual content or the way we need to be thinking about remote instruction over the next weeks and months? I will continue to look at the chat as we move forward, but in the interest of time, I am going to do that. And again, we learn most when we engage. And so I invite you to be using the chat early and often to make sure that you are getting the feedback that you need and are able to ask the questions that you have. Okay, I'm going to assume that your absence of questions is an indication that I'm just doing a fantabulous job here in delivering this. But of course, I'd like to hear from you. Let's see, now the chat is starting to populate. Okay, scroll back to check for questions and understanding. Okay, thank you, that was effective, I'm glad. How I'll get better over time with daily practice. Yes, that is the goal. Okay, Marsha, I'm not sure what you're referring to over here when you say you are, so please do clarify. I'd love to get a little more from you on that. Okay, number two. So number one was the understanding the fact that we have different ways by which we're going to engage with our students. Now we're talking about engagement. And by the way, if you think you're competing with a lot in a regular classroom, just realize what you're competing with when you are doing it remotely. Your students have devices nearby. They can mute themselves. They can turn off their cameras. Who knows what they're doing? The more that we engage, the better chance we have of ensuring effective learning. The drier we are and the less engaging and student-centric we are, the likelier we are in promoting distraction, distractibility, and attention elsewhere, which we cannot afford moving forward, okay? I'm just taking a look at John's comment for a moment. The competencies, yes, right, we do want to build efficacy and we want to continue to improve. By the way, that's always a question we should be asking ourselves. I know many of us, and I speak from my own personal experience, can be afraid to ask for feedback. Feedback we view as sort of an indictment. Really, feedback is your friend. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. The very best people in every industry, regardless of what you do, are people who are asking the question, how am I doing? Can I do it better? How can I do it better? And they set goals to improve consistently. So this is a loaded, number 2 is loaded, right? It's got engagement, differentiation, and learning styles. Again, this is easily a 3-hour talk right here, but we're not going to do that. And we're going to see how we can touch on at least some of this. So let's talk about engagement. And for engagement, I'm specifically going to focus on making the learning process more active than passive. And what I'd like to ask you to do is, what techniques are you using? Preferably, let's answer the question first, please, from a remote or virtual standpoint, meaning to say, since March, whenever you started teaching remotely, what were some of the tools or techniques that you used that helped ensure that your students were actively engaged in the learning? Now, as you are responding, thank you. I see that, Cynthia. Discussion boards, video, pre-recorded lessons. If you look here on the left side, you will see that more that the students are saying and writing and doing, the more they're going to remember, and they're going to remember it at a higher level. Okay, asking for feedback, breakout groups, excellent. Okay, these are all great examples. Please keep those coming. All right, the more you can do to actively engage your learners, the more you can ensure higher levels of, by the way, you'll also notice on the right side, higher levels of cognition. We're not going to get into Bloom's taxonomy right now, but those of you who are familiar with it, we did do a webinar on the topic many moons ago. Okay, you know that analysis, creativity, evaluation, these are the higher levels of the pyramid in Bloom's taxonomy. The more we get our students into that space, the deeper they are engaged and the more they're going to learn and be able to use. Okay, tech tools are great as well, fantastic. Some of you, by the way, are using things that I'm not personally familiar with because you are deeper in the trenches than I am. And I'll be the first to admit it. You know a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about better than I do. I'm simply trying to talk about how it all comes together and why some of these are really important. Okay, so as we talk about active learning, I'd like to touch on 3 areas that could be very valuable. Number 1 is the questioning tools or techniques that we use. Number 2 are having students complete things that will demonstrate learning, but again, putting them in an active posture, as well as authentic assessment, which we will talk about very briefly on the back end. Okay, so here are examples of active response, also known as formative assessment, also known as checking for understanding. Okay, so easily you could use the chat to have your students respond. Or maybe what you could do is you tell all of your students, okay, you ask a question and you want everybody to respond. So you give them 30 seconds and you say, do not populate, do not hit enter for 30 seconds. And then you say, okay, now please respond. And then all the answers come into the chat. Or maybe you have some other online tool that you're using. And then this way you can see what everybody was responding or thinking, and you could assess them based on their own personal understanding. You could have them thumbs up or thumbs down, or use fingers to indicate responses, C or I. These are all examples we'll talk about soon that indicate a nonverbal but active response to a question. Okay, let's take a look at some of these. So for example, sampling. You say to your students, be ready to summarize the difference between A and B. I don't know, summer and winter, plant cells and animal cells, poetry and prose, whatever, okay? And so you'll sample, you'll put the question out there, and then you'll choose an individual student, but you're getting everybody thinking about it because they know that the question is coming. So let's say you're reading about great presidents, great leaders, and you say, what were the reasons that so many people look up to George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or someone like this? I'll give you a minute to think about it. Everybody knows that they might be asked, and they're going to, as a result, they're going to be thinking about and trying to find the answer. That alone is an active posture, as opposed to oftentimes you broadcast a question and students can raise their hand if they want to, and if they don't want to, there's nothing expected of them. That if that is happening in your classroom, that has to change right away, because we cannot create, like I said, a passive posture, certainly not remotely, but even in person, okay? Signal responses, we talked about some of these already. Nodding your head, okay? Signaling with your fingers, how many parts oxygen to hydrogen, right? How many parts? So you would indicate that with your fingers, that kind of thing. C is if I make a statement and I say, is that correct? Show me like this. Incorrect, show me like this. C and I, okay? Raising your hand when you're ready to answer. Now, this last one is a little bit more challenging, right? In your book, point to, but they could pick up their book and they could point to it and show it on the screen. That's fine too, okay? Point to the name of the character that, or point to the word that means, something like this, right? And this way, you're getting everybody to respond using a signal, which allows you to survey the class without having to hear any noise. And that could be a very powerful approach, okay? Now remember, the more we involve our students, is the more they're going to learn. If you teach me, if you tell me, you know, I'm going to forget, right? Because it's in one ear, out the other. We know the research is very clear. If you teach it so that I'm processing it, it's going to be better. But if you involve me, that's where the real learning and retention occurs. And again, I'm sharing content with you. I kind of feel like that guy at the end of those auto commercials that speeds through the legalese in order to get through it on time. You know, it's like I'm talking at that speed. So I apologize. But at the same time, I know that if I don't do that, there's no way that we're going to be able to complete this, even with the extra time that we have budgeted. Now, some of you might be using these already, and your tools or the resources that you have is, you know, already has that built in. Some of you have forms or surveys or polling tools. Use them, right? Ask them, even something as simple as, what did you find to be easiest about the homework from last night? What was most challenging for you? Or if you're giving your students different choices, you're thinking about different ways to teach the content, maybe today's, maybe tomorrow's, you could poll them and get some feedback from your students. Creating collaboration. Somebody talked earlier about, right? It was Marcia. She talked about collaboration through breakout rooms, right? Which we are going to do, by the way, in the boot camp. It's a critical piece, right? I want to make sure that it's not just us talking the entire time. We want to make sure that you have opportunity to use the content and to really go deeper with colleagues. The other two pieces, somebody mentioned video. Let me scroll through here for a moment. I know we had it. Cynthia, thank you very much. So you guys could have just taught this content on your own. You know, I know that the wisdom here is far superior to anything that I can offer. And then the last one is content chunking. Content chunking, the idea is that if we limit how much we teach at a given period of time, and then we give them opportunity to do something with it, that is going to be much more impactful and meaningful than the opposite. I oftentimes reference this book. I don't know if you could see it. It's called Mastery Teaching by Robin Hunter. It's really based on the research and the teachings of Madeline Hunter. And one of the critical pieces is what's called horizontal teaching. So we do our anticipatory set, which we'll come back to, right? We begin the process. Eventually we have the objectives, we state the objectives. Given a class of 30 minutes on X, students will be able to, the whole SWABOT language. And then we actually start the inputting, right? We start teaching, whether it's through video or lecture or cooperative learning, whatever it is, we begin inputting. And then we want to model where appropriate. We want to give opportunities for practice. We want to provide closure. And then we want to start it again. So for each chunk of content, we want to teach, model, practice, close. And you kind of work through that each time, and that's what's going to allow the learning to be processed as separate chunks, really digested and understood well, and then you come back for more. Otherwise, if you just teach for 30, 40 minutes and you don't pause and come up for air and give them an opportunity to really utilize it, digest it, and understand it, the most they're going to be focused on is what you taught those last 5 or so minutes. They're definitely not thinking about what you taught 30 minutes before. But by chunking it, you give kind of like breathing space, which I'm trying to slow down so I can model it for you, right? You give breathing space for each learning segment, you give opportunity for utilization and practice and discussion, then the learning will be that much more effective. Okay, so before we go on within the context of, before we get into graphic organizers, is there anything about the active learning piece that either was a novelty for you that you'd like to start using that you haven't, something that you're using, you just want to be, acknowledged for, so to speak, and using it more, a question that you have? Is there anything specific to the active learning piece that you have questions about? Please use the chat to share that information. And as I look at the clock, I say to myself, I unfortunately don't even have time to pause here for much longer and see what you share, but I will be looking for it as we go. In the meantime, let's talk briefly about graphic organizers. I am a huge fan of them, and I certainly encourage you to use them as often as you can to help your students compartmentalize learning. We'll talk shortly about different kinds of learners. And one of the things that graphic organizers do is they really help the visual spatial learner in particular. John, to answer your question, the answer is absolutely yes. We should be thinking about blooms and or depth of knowledge regularly as we think about what we teach. We want to make sure that everybody's engaged minimally at the base levels of knowledge and comprehension, but we also want them to engage at higher levels as well so that they really understand it at a much deeper level and do things with the learning. Right? The goal in all of this is not just to teach content, but to teach them how to become learners, teach them how to be critical thinkers. Those are the life skills that are so important here. Okay, so here are all the benefits of graphic organizers. I'm not going to go through all of them with you, and there are many, many examples of them. The main thing is, it's a great way to get feedback about what students know. It's a great way to get students into an active posture because you are asking them to do something. Many graphic organizers can be manipulated digitally. So you could have them typing into the graphic organizer online. And even if it's an old-fashioned version where they have to print and write, still they are working by taking, for example, let's say you taught the 4 primary causes of the American Revolution, just making that up. Okay, you might have a graphic organizer that has space for 4 primary, let's call it bubbles or primary pockets, where they're going to map out those key elements, each with some supportive detail, and then you're going to use that graphic organizer to really to give them the visual, take all their notes and put it together so that they are actively recreating the knowledge in a visually pleasing way. Right? So that's all I can say on graphic organizers for now. And here's a quick summary of the 8 modalities or intelligences. You might recognize the idea of subliminal. Subliminal is actually something I should say, I made it up, but the idea is that you want to think about what the different modalities are so that you could use them at the proper time. Remember, your students in many cases learn differently than you do. They learn differently than you do. So just because you like to listen in order to learn doesn't mean your students do. Just because you like to read things and that's how you learn doesn't mean it works for everybody. So be mindful of different ways to learn and constantly find opportunities to integrate. Right? So even, for example, let's think about our presentation for the moment. With all of its limitations, what are some of the modalities that I have been tapping into during this presentation to help different kinds of learners learn? And while I ask you that question, I'm also going to take a look at the chat and see what we got going on over there. Okay, thank you, Tina, for properly sourcing the quote. I will go back and try to double check on that. But either way, the concept is relevant. Okay, so there's an intrapersonal. I'm assuming you mean that I'm asking you to think about things, Cynthia. There's the interpersonal that we're engaging with each other, right? I didn't allow you to engage really with each other in breakout yet. I'm not going to even, but that's the concept. Okay, visual, you see something. There's certainly the auditory piece, right, where you're hearing me speak. Let's see over here. Is there any others? Naturalist is a little bit of a sidebar from the standard classroom environment, but it's utilizing nature and nature concepts to deepen learning. Many people they love to garden, they love to be outdoors, and anything that kind of utilizes that pathway will help them learn. Okay, these are other ideas that you're saying that we tapped into, which is great. I think you could even make the argument that I presented some logical too, I think, right? I would hope that what I'm sharing is logical, right? It's based on the idea of it's logical to want to teach in a way that we learn. For example, right? These are these are in a particular order. They're in the order that fits subliminal. Thank you for asking, Marcia. I will tell you that the ones that basically everybody has would be visual, spatial, bodily kinesthetic, and auditory verbal linguistic. Those are the ones that basically everybody has. And these are important to know because every lesson should have these components, and most of them do. Right? There's always a visual component. There's always an auditory component. And with a little bit of creativity, there should be a movement, a kinesthetic component, even if it's just having your students doing some kind of bodily movement or gesture or squeezing something or soft toss. But anytime you get them into a group, right, any type of cooperative learning, that's also kinesthetic. So it's not difficult to tap into those. And as you get creative with the other ones, we've done think, pair, share on these webinars. Think is intrapersonal because I'm thinking to myself. Pair is interpersonal, and so is share. And it's kinesthetic. And it's visual, spatial in many cases. And it's certainly auditory, verbal, linguistic. And in many cases, it could also be logical, mathematical, depending on what's being discussed. So you could hit on almost everything within a relatively short period of time if you know how to engage your students. So we did 1 and 2. Those were probably the 2 big ones for me. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to unpack these other ones in a timely manner as well. So assessment and accountability are very important. If I don't feel that you're going to check up on me, if I don't feel that anything that I do really matters, right, I'm not going to care and I'm going to stop working. So we want to make sure that they know that this matters, and we are going to hold them accountable regardless of the proximity, distance, range in which we find ourselves. Okay, things to think about. So let's talk a little bit further. We already discussed formative assessment. So yes, that creates accountability. If I know the teacher is going to be asking me questions, I better listen, right? I better do the work. Same with graphic organizers. If I know, and here's a great objective, given a 30-minute lesson on the American Revolution, students will be able to complete a web graphic organizer that details the 4 primary causes of the American Revolution with details. Okay, I hope you got that. So that was a learning objective, right? Stated in SWABOT language. It's the BACD model. It's the CABD model. Condition, actors, behavior, and degree. I think I got that right. Okay, so the condition is the lesson, giving a 30-minute lesson. A is for the actors, which are the students. So students will be able to, what's the action? Complete a graphic organizer. And what's the degree? A 95% plus proficiency. Okay, A+ work. Okay, so that is now my learning objective that students know from the very beginning is something that I'm going to be asking of them. And of course, the more that students know what is going to be asked of them, the better from a mental standpoint we can approach the content. Hopefully the very fact that you read the webinar description and you saw that slide at the very beginning of the 5 components, plus all of the talking and imagery and whatnot that I've been sharing, that has helped your mind to make order of everything that I've been telling you. And you're creating folders in your brain, not only for learning, but for retention. So that the next time I ask you about it, it's not like it fell off of the moon. It actually has relevance to you. You can speak back to those 5 points. But you already probably could tell me that number 1 was Sorry, I can't hear you. Number one was about, different types of learning formats, remote, blended, etc. Number two, we talked about engagement with learning styles and the ability to differentiate. Now we're talking about accountability and assessment, and then the other two that are forthcoming. But I created it in a way that was logical. It sort of followed the pattern of here's the system, here is how I'm going to engage in the system, here's how I'm going to hold you accountable within the system, and then we kind of move through the process even further. So all of the things that we have talked about or will talk about are ways by which to ensure student accountability. Okay, let's see here. A quick question from Marcia. Yes, it's not just grading the work. It also includes giving them feedback. That's exactly right. The goal of formative assessment is not to grade them, it's to guide them, right? It's to give them feedback as we go, so that when they finally produce their final product, whatever that is, they have the most information, the most guidance, and will produce the very best that they can. The goal is to have them succeed, not the opposite, which I know that you know, but sometimes is not necessarily the way that we were trained as students growing up. And so it doesn't become part of our thinking process until we change our own paradigm and recognize that our job here is to help students succeed and not the opposite. So let's take a moment to talk about authentic assessment. It's really more about what they create rather than what they respond to. So typically speaking, we have a contrived test, and that's what they respond to. There are a lot of reasons why authentic assessment could be very valuable. It's everything from a timeline to a play, to a debate, to a poem, to having them create a test. All sorts of ways that students can demonstrate what they know without necessarily being tested. And maybe you could even do both. You could have a formal test and you could have an authentic assessment, and you could utilize both ways of assessing what students know. The more that they can create, the more invested they are, the deeper the learning becomes, the more they tap into higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy or Webb's depth of knowledge. They become cognitively more developed. There are many, many benefits in utilizing authentic assessment, and it's real life. So instead of just teaching mathematical concepts or budgeting, you have them actually budget a party or have them budget something more significant. They got to consider all the different things and how much is the food cost and the rental of the location and what other considerations do we need to factor in. And if I do more of this, that means less of that. All these kinds of things will come into play. If you're teaching history, have them become travel agents, right? Have them take you through places of in history, considering different criteria that they need to find, and then share with you as travel guides who are walking you through this place in history and kind of like giving you a sense of what it was like to be there. Right? What was it like to be in France, in Paris, during the French Revolution? And where are we going to visit? And who are the personalities we're going to see? And what are the dates that are involved? And what are the outcomes? And what is it like on the back end of the process? What was it like before it started? All of these things bring the history, they make it come alive because I'm making it relevant to students rather than the typical dry social studies lesson of this is what was going on and these were these people and these were those people and this is why they fought and this is what happened. It's much more engaging, personal, and I take ownership of it as a result. So authentic assessment is a great way, and it doesn't have to be on such a macro level. It could be really tight and tiny too, small things to demonstrate that students have mastered the learning. Even something as simple on the back end of class as a 1-minute paper, right? What was the primary thing that you learned today? What's something you have a question about? Or list 3 things that you learned today that were meaningful to you, or the 3 most important things that you learned today. All of these are a 1 or 2 sentence response to a question. All of these are ways for you to quickly get feedback either during class or as like an exit ticket on the back end of class of what your students learned, where you might need to reteach, and as a result of this, can I therefore move my process forward because I feel confident that the learning that I intended to engender, right, actually occurred. Okay, I haven't really stopped for questions recently. Please take a moment, what's working for you here? What did you learn that's meaningful? What do you have questions about? Whatever you respond to, by the way, please do be clear as to what you're responding to. So I know, are you asking a question or are you reinforcing it, for example? This way I can respond appropriately. Okay, I think we're doing actually pretty well on time. We will go over by a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be too bad. And I ask you to please try to hang out to the end. I will be sharing with you that special offer. And I think that if you feel that our time together thus far has been powerful and has moved the needle for you in terms of your professional learning. And you want to go deeper yet, and you want to really take it to the next level and be the very best professional you could be for a relatively small, I'm not here to judge anyone financially, of course, but for a relatively small entrance fee, it is a massive opportunity to go very deep. We're going to over deliver. I don't even want to tell you what it is because I've already got stuff planned, very excited about it, well beyond what's been publicized. And on top of it, there's buy one, get one, the opportunity to bring a friend. Right? Some people don't like to go to things alone, even if it's virtual, but you have the opportunity to bring a colleague, which means two people, maybe in the same building, that could talk afterwards and go deeper with each other. The opportunity there can be transformative, and I strongly suggest that you stick around for that. Okay, number 4 is the social emotional component, the learning and development. I've already mentioned to you how important I think this is, more so than ever. And I would argue, especially in this environment where students are more vulnerable, more removed and more distant. Friendships are not happening in the same kind of way. You know that we can't connect online the way we can connect in person. There's so many aspects of the interpersonal relationship that cannot be replicated virtually. So whatever we can do to deepen students' learning, their development, and kind of help them become more comfortable and at peace with themselves and how they're interacting. And also, by the way, to recognize, oftentimes we let our guard down when we communicate virtually because there's distance, so we feel like, what's the big deal? And we're more likely to say mean things and hurtful things because we don't have to actually be in the same room and face the consequences of our behaviors. So that's another reason why I think this is really important. If anyone else wants to weigh in and kind of like amplify why this is important, please do, right? Make the argument in the chat. Why is social emotional development, excuse me, and learning so critical in this particular time? Now, the only part I think I'm going to focus on today is the actual 5 core components of SEL. I'm going to go much deeper in the boot camp. I am curious to know, of these 5, let's number them, 1 on the top and 5 on the bottom. Which would you say is if you could only teach one, excuse me, actually what you could do is number them 1 through 5, with the first number being the most important and the last number being the least important. But I minimally want the first number for you. Of all these areas, which would be the one that you would want to go deeper on to make sure your students are really, really clear and comfortable? Is it self-awareness, right? My body space, the words or emotions that I convey and their impact on other people? Is it my ability to self-motivate, self-control, regulate my emotions? Is it the diversity and showing empathy? There's a lot of overlap here, I think. So it's okay if you have one intention versus another. The main thing is you're thinking about it from the perspective of what, if students could really own this, will help them in school and will help them in life. Number 4 is relationship skills, to work cooperatively with other people, which, by the way, when you do cooperative learning, you're feeding into. When you are having conversation with your students, especially during recess and unstructured time, you're oftentimes dealing with conflict resolution. And then the last one is responsible decision-making. So I see that only Lori has responded so far. Now I see some responses as well from others. If we could put numbers, so it looks like 2 is the most popular so far, but let's get some others as well. 2 and 5, 2 and 5, okay. All right, so these are things, thank you for this, by the way, now because I'm the one, by the way, within the bootcamp that's gonna be focusing on this. So I better take this under serious advisement to focus on those 2 in particular, but all of them I think are important. Yes, you are right, Tina, we have to go deeper, okay, because let's see over here. Really start learning again, whatever, yeah, that's true. It's the foundation, right? We can't expect our students to just be students. They're human beings first. And the human interaction is a critical piece. So thank you for all of that. And let's move on. Okay, so finally, when it relates to number 5, which is our plan for the first few weeks, we want, Etty and I want everybody to go into the school year really knowing what's the plan, right? How am I gonna be successful? Some of it relates to relationships, calling your students. By the way, this is really important, especially nowadays. If you're not gonna see your students in person, call them on the phone, use a survey, find out everything from their past history, their experiences, their interests, Could be something as simple as their favorite sports team or their favorite food. You know, when we celebrate, what kind of food should I bring in? Excuse me. Or something like this, asking them, you know, what kind of learning do they prefer? Maybe a couple of questions relating to modalities, or what have other teachers done that have really connected to you or made you feel valued in class so that you could replicate some of these same behaviors. A simple survey, Google Forms, easy peasy, Survey Monkey, you name it. There's so many ways to do it nowadays. There's no excuse to not connect with your students and make them feel that their input is of value to you from day one. And once you make the connection, take time to preserve it, having regular conversation, calling them if they're absent, finding ways by which to help them learn. If you know, ask them what's working in class, what's not working. Don't let it drop, and don't just assume that everything's working for them. Preserve it, deepen it. That's the way to connect with students in today's environment more so than ever, right? Set the proper tone in class with you know, a quick hi, how are you, high fives, that kind of thing, whether you could do it in person or not. An opening thought or story, sometimes to bring them in. We talked earlier about anticipatory set. It should be congruent, but tie them from that into the learning you want to teach can oftentimes be a great bridge. Praising them early, building their equity. Rick Lavoie talks about this all the time, giving them lots and lots of poker chips, right? Because the more poker chips they have, the more they'll be willing to take risk. And you're not going to learn unless you are a risk taker. If you're constantly keeping everything close to the vest and you're afraid to open your mouth because you're afraid what's going to happen, then there's no learning that's going to occur. So you have to be able to help students put themselves out there in a healthy and constructive way. When it comes to rules, right? Less of this on the left side of your screen and more of what you see on the right, right? Try to make it inviting. Think about it from a thematic standpoint. Everything you do should be for the good of the class. In our school, when I was head of school, we talked about PBIS and creating values, safe, friendly, respectful, responsible. What does safety look like in all of these environments? School bus, classroom, you know, common areas, this kind of thing. What does respect look like? What does it look like towards our work, towards our interactions, each other, this kind of thing? If you keep objectives or values, then everything is above board. It's not about you're bad or you're good. It's about, is your behavior consistent with what we want to achieve in our classroom? And if the goal that we want to achieve is everybody learning and feeling safe, then every behavior should be able to be measured through the prism of, does it help us learn and does it keep us safe, or does it promote safety? And if the answer is no to one or two of those, we know something has to change. And it's an easy metric, and we constantly refer back to it without getting very, very granular about know this and know this and know this. It doesn't have to be that way. So that's a critical piece that I would encourage you to think about. And the other point relating to behavior, let's remember that misbehavior is oftentimes the result of less than ideal instruction or maybe under planning. So maybe students feel that the information is boring or it's too hard, or you know, they don't see the value in it in terms of its connection to real life, or they want to be recognized and noticed and they don't feel like they have power or control in the classroom, or they don't feel that the teacher cares and has spent time relating to them. Remember all of this as you think about classroom management and as you think about getting off on the right foot. What is it that's going to help your students connect with you and what you're teaching so that you have less to worry about from a management standpoint, and you could focus primarily on engagement, learning, and all of the other things that we had talked about. So as we have our review here, I'm just curious to know, of the 5, let's go through the first. I have 2 questions for you. Let's do them one at a time. Of everything we talked about, using this as sort of a, to jog your memory, what would you say were the 1 or 2 things that we discussed today that were most useful for you, that really helped you move the needle, that really helped you to reimagine your practice moving forward and kind of motivates you to do that much more in the months ahead? Okay, thank you, Marcia. Focusing on the intelligences. SEL awareness. Thank you, Lori. reviewing the platforms, appreciate it. PBIS, dynamic online classroom environment, excellent. Looking for more, these are great. I think I'm drawing a blank here in terms of what my second question was going to be. But this one certainly is most important. I would like everybody in their own mind at least to commit to something as a result of today's presentation. What are you going to do as a result of our time together today that's going to move the needle for you? Oh, you like that with the credible teacher. Thank you, Tina. Yeah, I think it's a great reference point, right? We all think it's being a really qualified teacher. We forget about the relationship piece and how dynamism, being dynamic, is so important as well. So thank you for bringing that back to our attention. Okay, so as you're considering that further, I'm going to continue to watch the chat. Here is the resource that I referenced earlier, the Back to School Bootcamp, and I strongly encourage you to consider minimally go to the webpage, please, and take a look at what the offer is, because I think it's a very special opportunity to connect with like-minded learners, really go deep in some of the most important areas. I just put the link into the chat, and I'm also going to put into the chat a direct link to where you can go straight to the purchase page. But you'll see over here on the bottom right, all the things that we're going to focus on: the actionable plan, the tools for engagement, which we're going to focus on tomorrow in depth, the accountability and assessment, which I just touched on a little bit here. I mean, if you think, like I said before, that this was valuable, we're going much deeper. It's going to be 3 sessions in the summer, 2 more in the fall when you're actually in the classroom and have a chance to practice, help with all the social emotional pieces, really give you confidence in your ability. And if you're a principal or somebody who is more veteran, maybe a train the trainer approach where you learn so that you could teach others. All of these are very valuable. And by the way, if you cannot make it based on the time, everything will be recorded and you will have the ability to afterwards to listen to all the recordings. So I certainly would love to have you there live, but that should not be a reason to not participate. Now, I'm pretty sure that this is the link that you should enter if you are going to BOGO, buy one, get one. It should be the link if you go to the purchase page, and then you have over there the opportunity to buy before you do. If you're doing it for 2 people, so you'd enter 2. Okay. In other words, you would buy it twice and then, or buy 2 of them, I should say, and then enter the code and it will discount you. If it doesn't, you'll let me know. And I'm going to actually put my email in here as well. I don't know why it's capitalized here, but I'll put my email in here as well. If you have any issues at all, I will certainly help you. And my information is on the website as well. So definitely, if you think that this could be useful to you and or to any of your colleagues, I strongly suggest that you take a look. We are starting tomorrow. We do want to keep it small. We're going to be engaging on multiple levels. And I don't know of any other offering right now that's going to be this holistic, this comprehensive, this engaging, and bringing this much expertise between myself and Etty to the conversation. So I want to thank you all for being here. I hope that this was valuable to you. I hope you stay in touch as you continue on your journey. And I want to I actually finished with time to spare. So kudos to me, I guess, for getting that done in less time than I promised. But the main thing is, let's continue to support each other during these uncertain times. And if the boot camp can serve you, please do take advantage. Wishing you much continued safety and well-being in all regards and success in all of your endeavors. And a great day to all of you. Stay warm. I should say the opposite. Stay cool and safe, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye now.